This wasn't a boxing ring. There were no ropes, no crowd noise, no referee waiting to step in. Instead, Muhammad Ali was seated inside a room designed to intimidate without saying a word. Gold-lined walls, silent guards, men whose power didn't come from fists, but from wealth, nations, influence. This was a different kind of ring. Ali had walked into rooms like this before, but never with stakes quite like these. In boxing, doubt came from opponents. Here it came from expectation, from assumption, from the quiet confidence of people who believed the outcome was already decided. They looked at Ali and saw a man at the end of his career, a fighter past his physical prime, a champion whose legend was bigger than his bank account, and they believed one thing very clearly. When the moment came, he would fold. Not because he was weak, but because everyone breaks when the numbers get big enough. Because principle sounds noble. Until it's tested against something real, no one said it out loud. They didn't have to. The glances said it. The calm posture said it. The way the room waited said it. This wasn't pressure like a punch. It was pressure like gravity, quiet, constant, unavoidable. Ali understood what they were thinking. They believed this was a performance, that his confidence was part of the show, that when faced with unimaginable wealth, even Muhammad Ali would blink to them. This wasn't a question of if, only how quickly. They thought he was bluffing. They thought this was the moment where ideals become negotiable, where identity bends, where a man chooses comfort over conviction. Ali sat calmly, listening, and when the time came, when the room expected agreement, they were about to find out at 36 years old. Muhammad Ali was no longer the untouchable force people remembered from his early reign. He was still champion, still famous, still respected, but time had started asking its questions. His body carried miles of punishment. Training camps were longer. Recovery took more out of him. Everyone around Ali knew the truth. Even if the crowd didn't, the end was closer than the beginning. From the outside, Ali looked rich beyond measure. Stadiums filled when his name was announced. Cameras followed his every move. To the public, money and Ali felt inseparable. The reality was different. Boxing in the 1970s didn't build dynasties the way modern sports do. There were no billion-dollar endorsements, no long-term safety nets. What Ali earned, he shared, often immediately. His generosity was legendary. If someone asked for help, he gave it. Friends, strangers, charities, family. Ali believed money was meant to move, not sit. And it moved fast. Behind the scenes, expenses piled up. A large entourage. Travel. Causes he believed in. Investments that didn't always return what they promised. The legend grew, but the cushion underneath it didn't. That's what made this moment dangerous. Because vulnerability doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like success without security. Like a champion with obligations heavier than titles. In the ring, Ali knew how to survive pressure. He could read opponents. Adjust mid-fight. Lean on instinct. But this pressure didn't come in rounds. There was no bell to save him. No corner to retreat to. This was about the future. About responsibility. About what happens when applause fades. For the first time in a long time, Ali wasn't being tested as a fighter, but as a man making a decision that punches couldn't solve. This wasn't a fight he could punch his way out of. The man seated across from Muhammad Ali was not an opponent he could study or outmaneuver. King Khalid ruled a kingdom built on oil, influence, and tradition. His wealth was measured not in accounts, but in generations. Decisions made in his presence didn't just affect individuals. They echoed across nations. This was power that didn't need to announce itself. The invitation extended to Ali wasn't casual. It had been arranged months in advance through diplomats and intermediaries. Officially, it was ceremonial, a visit of respect between a world-famous athlete and a newly crowned king. Unofficially, it meant more. Ali wasn't here only because he was heavyweight champion. He was here because he was the most recognizable Muslim athlete on earth, a man whose faith was public, visible, unapologetic, king. Khalid admired that he had watched Ali sacrifice years of his prime rather than betray his beliefs. During the Vietnam War, in a world where loyalty was often bought, Ali's refusal to bend had left an impression. The early part of the meeting reflected that. Its admiration, praise was offered, not flattery, but respect. Ali was thanked for bringing honor to Islam, for standing firm when it cost him dearly, for carrying faith into places where it wasn't always welcomed. The tone was calm, warm, almost familial. Advisors listened quietly. Guards stood still. Nothing felt rushed. Trust was being built. Ali nodded, listening, aware that respect in rooms like this often came with expectations attached. He understood diplomacy well enough to recognize when admiration was genuine, and when it was preparing the ground for something more. The king spoke carefully, thoughtfully, and then, without raising his voice or changing his expression, the conversation changed. The king paused, not for drama, but with attention. Then he gestured subtly to one of his advisors standing nearby. The man stepped forward, carrying an ornate briefcase, its surface polished and heavy, the kind of object that already suggested importance before it was ever opened. He placed it carefully on the table between them and unlocked it. Inside were documents, not contracts for a fight, not endorsements, not appearances. This was something else entirely. The king spoke calmly, almost conversationally as the figures were explained. Not rushed, not emphasized. Just stated as if the number itself didn't need help. $100 million up front. The room didn't react. No gasps, no movement. But the air changed. Every person present understood what that number meant, not just as money, but as freedom. Adjusted for time, it was the kind of wealth that would never run out, the kind that erased uncertainty, the kind that turned future generations into spectators instead of strugglers. This wasn't about comfort. It was about permanence. For an athlete nearing the end of his career, it was unthinkable to refuse. Fighters spent their lives chasing security they might never reach. One injury, one bad investment, 1 year, too long, and it all disappeared. This offer erased every risk, homes, travel, legacy, safety. No more wondering what came next. No more worrying about family, health, or the long road after fame. The advisors watched Ali carefully, not to judge, but to confirm what they already believed, because men didn't say no to numbers like this. Not when the world would applaud them for saying yes. Not when refusal made no practical sense. Not when pride could be reframed as principle. In that room, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, the assumption was quiet but universal. Everyone assumed the answer was obvious. For a moment, the offer sat in the room untouched. Then the king spoke again, casually, almost as an afterthought. Of course, there were conditions. Nothing unusual, he explained. Nothing meant to offend. Just practical details that came with a role of such importance. The tone remained calm, respectful, most gentle. Ali listened. The first condition was simple enough to represent the kingdom fully. Ali would need to renounce his American citizenship. The words landed quietly, but they landed hard. The second condition followed without pause. He would become a Saudi citizen, move his family permanently, fully adopt the Saudi way of life. No split identity, no temporary arrangement, no returning home. The room went still. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about belonging. Ali felt the shift immediately. This was no longer a discussion about opportunity. It was a question of identity, of who he was allowed to be once the deal was done. Around him, advisors exchanged brief glances. Not alarmed, not uncomfortable, just observant. To them, this was reasonable. Loyalty, after all, was clearer when it was exclusive. But Ali understood what was being asked, not just a passport. separation from the place that shaped him, from the people he argued with and fought for, from the contradictions he believed he could help change. The offer promised certainty. The condition demanded surrender. Money on one side, identity on the other, no raised voices. No pressure applied. The silence itself did the work in rooms like this. Silence was expectation. Ali didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what the question was, and what most men would do when faced with it. This was the point where ideals usually soften, where values are reworded, where compromises are justified. This is where most men break. That night, away from the palace and its quiet power, Muhammad Ali sat alone with the weight of what had been offered. The luxury of his guest. Quarters couldn't soften the question waiting for him. No crowd, no advisors watching. Just time and the consequences of choosing wrong. His financial advisor didn't hesitate. The numbers were laid out plainly, without emotion or philosophy. This wasn't opinion, it was math. $100 million up front? Guaranteed income for life. Absolute security. This is more money than boxing could ever give you, he said. Your children? Your grandchildren? Their children. None of them would ever worry about money again. It was hard to argue with logic that clean. Ali listened, but said little. Fear has a way of dressing itself as responsibility. The advisor spoke of safety, of medical care, of removing uncertainty from a future that was no longer controlled by athletic prime. Then his wife spoke quietly, not with numbers, not with strategy. She asked one question. What does your heart tell you? Ali didn't answer right away. He stood by the window, looking out over the desert, endless, still unforgiving. The same silence he'd felt in the meeting room followed him here. He thought about everything the offer would solve, and everything it would erase. He knew fear was real. He knew money mattered, but he also knew something else. Some choices follow you longer than consequences. Some decisions shape not just your future, but who you become when no one's watching. Ali finally spoke, his voice steady. Some things, he said, are worth more than money. The room fell quiet again, and by morning Ali knew. The next morning, Muhammad Ali returned to the palace. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, reflecting off gold and marble, making the room feel even larger and even quieter than before. Everything about the setting suggested certainty, control, finality. The offer hadn't been withdrawn. If anything, it had grown more generosity, more assurances, more confidence that today would end in agreement. Why wouldn't it? Men didn't turn down wealth like this. Not after sleeping on it. Not after hearing the numbers. Not after imagining a future without struggle. The advisors were calm, almost relaxed. This was formality now. The decision, they believed, had already been made. Ali took his place across from the king. Have you reached your decision? The king asked, his voice warm, his expression open. Ali didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood. Chairs shifted softly. Eyes lifted. The room leaned forward without realizing it. For 5 seconds, no one spoke. No translator. No advisor. No movement. Just silence. Not the awkward kind. The heavy kind. The kind that settles when everyone realizes the moment matters more than what comes next. In those 5 seconds, assumptions held their breath. The logic of money waited to be confirmed. The belief that ideals eventually bend, prepared to be proven right. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The moment Ali would nod, or smile, or soften his stance. 5 seconds passed, and nothing happened. Then he spoke. When Muhammad Ali finally spoke, his voice was calm, not defiant, not emotional, certain. He began with respect. Gratitude for the generosity, appreciation for the honor, an acknowledgement that the offer was beyond anything most men could even imagine. Then he drew the line. If I take your money, Ali said, people will wonder why I speak the way I do. They'll ask if my faith is real or if it was something I sold. The room stayed silent. Ali explained that he didn't become Muslim for comfort or advantage. He didn't choose faith as a career move. He chose it because it shaped who he was when no one was rewarding him for it. Paid belief, he said, changes how truth is heard. If his words came with a paycheck, they would lose their weight. If he spoke as an employee, his faith would sound rehearsed, not lived. Then Ali spoke about America, not defensively, not romantically, honestly. America was flawed. It had hurt him, challenged him, tested him publicly, but it was still home. It was where his voice mattered because it came from inside the struggle, not outside it. I want people to see, he said, that you can be a proud American and a devoted Muslim at the same time. That was the bridge. Ali didn't want to belong entirely to one side. Bridges work because they stay anchored to both. The moment he surrendered one identity for another, the bridge collapsed. If I take your money, Ali said, I become your representative. But if I speak from my own heart, I represent something greater than any contract. No one interrupted him. When Muhammad Ali finished speaking, no one rushed to respond. The silence returned, but it felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, reflective. King Khalid sat still, his expression no longer confident or expectant, but thoughtful. In his world, wealth resolved most questions. Loyalty was usually secured, not debated. And yet here was a man who had turned down more money than most could imagine, not out of pride, but out of clarity. The king spoke slowly. In his entire life, he said, he had never met a man who would refuse such wealth for such reasons. What surprised the room? Most wasn't disappointment. It was respect. The advisors exchanged looks again. But this time, they carried disbelief mixed with admiration. They had expected negotiation, hesitation, perhaps a softened compromise. Instead, they had witnessed something rarer. The king stood and approached Ali. The gesture alone carried meaning. This wasn't authority asserting itself, it was acknowledgement. He told Ali that refusing the offer had proven more than acceptance ever could. That money could buy agreement, but it couldn't buy credibility. And that by saying no, Ali had shown his faith was priceless. Then came the unexpected turn. The king withdrew the offer of money and citizenship, not in anger, but in understanding. In its place, he offered something else: friendship, respect, support without ownership. Ali would always be welcome in the kingdom, not as an employee, but as a brother. What had begun as a transaction ended as recognition. The silence that once waited for compliance now reflected admiration. The room had gone silent for a different reason now. Years passed, and the money Ali turned down faded into numbers people barely remembered. But the decision didn't. What Muhammad Ali preserved that day wasn't wealth, it was credibility. When Ali spoke about Islam afterward, no one questioned his motive. There was no contract behind his words, no sponsor shaping his message. People listened because they knew his faith had already cost him in lost fights, lost income, and lost comfort. That authenticity carried weight. Faith leaders pointed to Ali as an example of belief that couldn't be bought. Business schools studied the moment as a case of long-term trust over short-term gain. Athletes and public figures quietly referenced the Ali standard, and facing deals that threatened to blur their values, because once people know you can't be purchased, your voice changes. Ali's choice also strengthened his place in America. His criticism of the country was never mistaken for abandonment. He stayed, he argued, he belonged, and that made his words harder to dismiss. The personal cost, however, was real. Money problems didn't disappear. Medical bills came. The future grew uncertain. As the early signs of Parkinson's disease emerged, the safety the Saudi offer promised would have mattered deeply. Yet, Ali never expressed regret. When friends brought up the offer years later, he smiled and said that provision comes from choosing the right path, not the richest one. Looking back, this moment explains something essential about greatness. Greatness isn't just domination. It isn't applause. It isn't winning every exchange. Sometimes greatness is restraint. Sometimes it's refusing the offer that would make life easier, because it would make you someone else. Ali didn't win that day with speed or power. He won by walking away. Some victories only happen when you walk away.